Let's go ahead and get back. Tim, again, thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you're feeling a little under the weather, but thank you for taking some time out of your evening to spend with us and our listeners.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So we were talking a little bit right before the news break. Again, ship has got all this iron ore, these pellets, these balls in it. It's listing over. He's got a couple of fence rails laid down. Some people have talked that I've read different articles, different theories that if those fence rails are down, because the ship being so large, it does flex. Maybe something happened to cause those rails to break.
Yeah, so this is where a lot of speculation comes in because, there were no survivors. So we're not sure exactly what happens other than, there's physical evidence we can examine and we can hear these radio transmissions that something was definitely happening and it was not good. But yeah, there could have absolutely been something that was happening, whether it be, there was a lot of flex in the ship. Actually, a lot of crew men who have been on the lakes have said the Edmund Fitzgerald was notorious for, it was so long, and especially when waves were coming up over the ship, it would kind of flex almost like a snake, and it flexed a lot more than a lot of ships do. So there could have been all kinds of different things that were causing these physical things to be happening.
Do you think when the rails, again, with the rails being damaged, and again, you can look at videos. I mean, there's actually, again, if you go to Boat Nerd, but if you look online at YouTube, there are videos of these Great Lake freighters like the Arthur M. Anderson, and they show them in heavy waves, and you can watch that rail bend and twist. I mean, again, at 800 feet, something has got to give. But do you think at that point, like you said, things started to happen, do you think that they possibly bottomed out at that point?
That is one of the theories. Captain Cooper of the Anderson actually believes that that's exactly what happened, that the Edmund Fitzgerald bottomed out. So what this basically means is the bottom of the ship can hit the bottom of the lake, or the hull of the ship can hit the bottom of the lake floor, and that can really crack the hull open or rip the hull open even. So Lake Superior is very deep, and as we know, the Edmund Fitzgerald is under 530 feet of water, only there are actual parts of the lake and parts of the course that the Edmund Fitzgerald took where the lake was actually much more shallow. There's actually particularly a part of the lake called 6 Fathom Shoal. A fathom is 6 feet, so that would imply 36 feet. 6 Fathom Shoal is actually deeper than that. Only there are portions where the Edmund Fitzgerald went near that there is much shallower regions than that 530 feet. So if it hit the bottom of the lake, it could have started taking on water. Now, whether it's immediately started sinking or it just started taking on water at that point is one of the many theories that have been put forth as to why the Edmund Fitzgerald may have ultimately sank.
Right. So now this is at 3:30. He notices that at 3:30 p.m. he's listing over to starboard. They're running their pumps. Of course, him and Captain Cooper are having conversations. Captain Cooper's kind of keeping an eye on him. Like you said, he's throttled back a little bit so the Arthur and the Anderson can catch up to him. At this point, he also realizes now that he's lost his radar as well. He's got no radar whatsoever, and of course, at the beacon at Whitefish Point also is offline due to the intensity of the storm. The electricity is down. Correct?
Yes, so saying perfect storm is probably cliche, only pretty much everything went wrong at just the right time that the Edmund Fitzgerald was ultimately blind. So actually the Edmund Fitzgerald had 2 radars. Both of the radars were out. It was taking on water. There was a bad list. There was no beacon that the Edmund Fitzgerald could follow in order to, not to mention there was very low visibility because of all of the waves and in the middle of this terrible storm. So the only hope that the Edmund Fitzgerald had was the Anderson was actually radioing back and forth to try to explain to the Edmund Fitzgerald obstacles that could be in the way based on the information that the Anderson had about 10 miles behind.
Right. So he's kind of navigating in the dark at this point. He's got no radar. He's got waves that are continuing to build. I've read some things that said waves at 35, 40 feet. I mean, this is, and coming from several different directions too, correct?
Absolutely. So at this point, Captain McSorley knows something is terribly wrong, and they are worried. They're using the Arthur M. Anderson for as much information as they can, but ultimately, it's like trying to, it's much worse than walking through a room. But just imagine what walking without being able to see is like, and how many things you can run into, or how many obstacles you can have. And now imagine doing that with a 730-foot ship in the middle of a huge storm. So and you're limping, for example, because there's this list and they're taking on water. So it's just everything that could be going wrong is going wrong at this point. And at one point, the Edmund Fitzgerald actually says, we're holding our own. They're doing everything that they can, but no crew members can be on deck. They don't actually know where they're going. And then radio transmissions go out.
Right, and these guys they're basically battling this storm because, again, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where they notice, where they mention about topside damage again, where possibly they could have bottomed out. They've got vent covers missing. They're taking on water. They're listing. Those couple hours, Tim, have got to just be absolutely horrific until 7 p.m. approaches. I mean, that's from 3 to 7. That's almost 4 hours of fighting through this, of nonstop weather.
Yeah, so the storm it's not like the storm is letting up very much during this period of time. So this has been, anybody having to go through this even for a matter of minutes would be terrible, and it would be a very difficult situation to be in. But this was going on for hours until ultimately during the 7 o'clock hour, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared from radar and they lost all radio contact.
Gotcha. The Anderson was trying to catch up to them, though, correct? As you mentioned earlier, they were trying to get, obviously, the Fitzgerald knows he's in trouble. He wants somebody close just in case he loses the ship.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that would be accomplished by the Anderson getting closer. Not only are they able to have a visual on the Edmund Fitzgerald so they can actually see what's going on with the ship right in front of them, but ultimately, if something does happen, they can try to make a rescue mission for the men.
Gotcha. So 7:10 p.m. comes. They're still talking to the Anderson, but at this point, around 7 o'clock, Cooper talks about these 35-foot plus waves that gets him from behind, correct? Basically, it's like being on a roller coaster or getting rear-ended. He just gets shoved forward with these two massive waves.
Yeah, so this is actually where a couple other theories of what may have happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald come in. So those two waves that Bernie Cooper report is happening, he thinks, other than when he may have shoaled earlier and he started taking on water, Bernie Cooper believes that those waves went forward and kind of could have enveloped the ship. So a couple other theories that people have had over the years on what could have happened. So you have very heavy taconite pellets. If these waves are on each end of the ship, and the middle of the ship is lifted up, so ultimately you've got 35-foot waves at each end of this 700-foot ship, and the middle's not supported, it could have broken in two. Some people believe that that's what happened. Also, people believe that this theory of the three sisters, some of your listeners may have heard of, are that these waves that Bernie Cooper has described moved forward 10 miles ahead and actually just completely overwhelmed the ship that was already taking on water and already leaning to one side, and it just plunged into Lake Superior.
Gotcha. And those were those 35-footers that came over the rear end of the Arthur M. Anderson, and then of course move forward. And I know I've looked at different things. Again, look at different documents where they talk about the crew of the Anderson. Figured that they're heading toward the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it's not going to take much time when they both meet.
Right. So yeah. So like I said, so far, everything that's going wrong and everything that seems to be happening during this storm, already to a ship that, an analogy we can use is the Edmund Fitzgerald is already limping, and then these waves are coming along and pushing it even further. Limping, and you're carrying a huge backpack if you're a person.
Mm-hmm.
So the Edmund Fitzgerald's got all of this water and all of this weight from its cargo. It's leaning to one side, and then you're having these more and more waves come at it over the hours.
Unbelievable. So now Edmund Fitzgerald is gone. It just disappears off of the Andersons' radar. Obviously, they're sailing in the same area. They're on the same path. No ship to be found. Cooper, at that point, starts calling for help, for assistance, the Coast Guard. What happens next, Tim?
Yeah, so there was actual, as far as the timeline goes, yes, Burning Cooper was actually calling for help and saying that he could not reach the Edmund Fitzgerald. There are people who are very upset with how that actually unfolded, because the Coast Guard was focused more on another small boat that was missing at the time, and it seemed as though the search efforts for the Edmund Fitzgerald took quite a while to actually be undertaken before an official search party commenced. It was a couple hours that the Edmund Fitzgerald that the Arthur Anderson had lost contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald before the Coast Guard mounted an official search. Once this search started, ultimately they did not find much. There was a completely ripped to shreds lifeboat that was found, but the ships that were actually searching for the Edmund Fitzgerald for hours and hours, up until 2 a.m. or so, they did not find anything. And they didn't find any survivors in the water.
Just the ship is gone. That's it. It's over.
Yeah.
So a couple days. So at that point, then the ship is gone. Then, of course, I believe, was it a few days later, a Coast Guard aircraft in another ship do some sonar, and they determine that there's a wreck on the bottom of the ocean, or the bottom of the lake at that point in time. It's deemed that the ship is down. There's no survivors found in the water. I believe some debris has washed up, but that's it. The ship is gone. It's over.
Yes. So a few days later, like you mentioned, it's presumed lost because they do see that there is a shipwreck, a very large shipwreck at the bottom of Lake Superior at that point. It wasn't officially identified by the Coast Guard until May of 1976, when they were able to get visual inspection of it. But at this point, it was presumed lost. What happened in the following days following the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald are what, a side of the story that I've heard over the years and that a lot of people are interested in, that has really angered a lot of people. So most of the family members of the men who were lost on the Edmund Fitzgerald, they were not notified. They found out on the news just like everyone else. And Pam Johnson, to this day, the daughter of Robert Rafferty, the cook, she still tells the story. I actually just heard her tell the story a month or so ago around the anniversary. She said she's still waiting for the call that they've lost her father. So there was no official notification that this ship had sank, and no notification to the families that this crew was lost.
Unbelievable. And this was a question, a little off topic, but one of our listeners, this was in one of the emails that I received, Tim, one of our listeners wanted to know, did the owners of the Fitzgerald, did they help the families as far as financial help at all? Was there any financial restitution for these people?
There was so those amounts, there's some kind of an equation where they try to quantify what type of money you get, but there was financial. There was money that was given to the families. I never disclose any numbers that I know, because I think that differed by family, and that's a very private thing. But I do know that it was not what a lot of people probably think it was.
Right. Not much. Well, and especially back then, 40 years ago. So the ship is gone. It's finished. It's lost. Some expeditions start to take place. Is that true?
Yeah, so there have been many expeditions over the year, the Coast Guard expedition. The interesting thing about the expeditions are, with all of the major expeditions that have been happening, a theme that you'll notice is every time a team dives to the bottom of Lake Superior and they see the wreck, some of these are scientists, some of these are divers that have a little bit less experience. However, each expedition that comes out, it seems that they say, okay, we know definitively what happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald. My answer to everyone is, no, you don't. Nobody knows. And that's the thing that I think draws so many to this wreck are we can look at more and more evidence, but there is no definitive cause that we can say definitely made the Edmund Fitzgerald sink. But over the years, several expeditions have happened. The Bell Recovery Expedition is one of the most recent that a lot of people know about. Also, there was a Deep Quest expedition led by a diver from Michigan in 1994. And there have been some really well-known names that have actually dived to the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 1994, each of these expeditions had their own controversy that went with them. But I think the most controversial mission that a lot of people know about is in 1994, the divers actually reported that they did find a crew member among the wreckage of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So there was actually a body. And this angered a lot of people. It also, some people reported that there was closure because of the condition that they found this possible crewman in. And this was kind of the beginning of family members saying, we definitely want this shipwreck to be off limits to dives because this really is a grave site. A lot of the families consider this, where their loved one is buried.
And if not mistaken, was it a father and son team or something that went on the expedition? But I thought that, and again, this could just be rumor or hearsay, that did they recover the body that they thought they? What I understood is it was supposedly a body that was actually up toward the front of the bow outside the ship. Was it actually a crew member, or was that body just left there?
So the body was not recovered. This is the only official documentation of a body anywhere near the wreckage. Whether or not there have been discoveries of possible crewmen along the years during the expeditions, that's something that only the people that dove to the shipwreck will know. But yes, it was a father and son, two of the members of the team. It was a father and a son, part of Frederick Shannon's Deep Quest expedition.
Gotcha. Interesting. We got another caller. You want to take another call?
Absolutely.
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk. You're on with Dr. Tim McCall.
Yeah. Well, not another call, the same caller.
Okay, Frank, go ahead.
Hi, Frank.
This Fringe. You're not on the Fringe. This is absolutely... I love this stuff. So, this vessel that followed the Edmund Fitzgerald, the Anderson, was it the same type of vessel?
Yeah, it was a freighter as well.
Pardon me?
It was a freighter as well that was carrying cargo as well.
Okay. Was this a conveyor belt type deal? Where one ship followed the other. They filled them up and same course, same everything.
Oh, you mean like a convoy type of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that is something I definitely would not be able to answer. I don't have the expertise in that.
Was the Anderson following, virtually the same course as the Edmund Fitzgerald, to get to where they want to go?
That I would want to verify. So there are actual maps of the original. There are actual maps of the course they took. I know in the middle of the voyage, it was actually specifically the Anderson was going to stay as close behind as possible. I don't know if they were originally sharing the same course, only ultimately the Anderson started following back almost exactly behind the Edmund Fitzgerald for a lot of the voyage.
I can see, this is a manufacturing thing, a conveyor belt type deal. So every ship followed every ship, just like everything does on a conveyor belt. And they continued on whether, hell or high water, and that was their job. And maybe this captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald, I don't know how many times he did this trip, but maybe he said, let's stay the course.
Yeah.
So one thing about Ernest McSorley was he did have a reputation as a heavy water captain or a hard water captain. So he was known for being more comfortable with heavy storms than a lot of captains were. However, I don't think there's really any evidence to believe that Captain McSorley knew that the ship was in danger and he was going to continue through, because ultimately he did try to take steps in order to protect the ship and his crew.
So, he didn't toward north or south or anything. Like I said in the early call, I'm from Lake Erie, and, these storms on the Great Lakes, especially on Lake Erie, because it is so shallow, the waves and the wind and everything are quite different than they are in the open ocean.
Oh yeah, they like I mentioned, Frank. In the open ocean you can have a 40-foot wave, but the ships can roll up them and down them. But these things, they converge. They're so tight because of the shallower waters and the tighter bodies of water. It's absolutely amazing what can happen. Frank, I got another caller. Hey, thank you for calling.
You bet.
Take care. We've got another one. I think this is going to be Tony. Tim, hold on.
Okay, great.
Good evening. Welcome to K-Talk. You're on the air.
Hey, Pat, this is Tony calling.
Tony, how are you, my friend?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. On the other line, we've got Tim McCall, who has put SSEdmundFitzgerald.org together and is an Edmund Fitzgerald historian expert. So good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tony has been on our program before, Tim, a couple of times. Tony is a amazing artist. Tony, you want to give Dr. McCall and a little bit of your bio, how you got into maritime? He's an amazing artist. What he does is amazing. And then he was part of the Edmund Fitzgerald Memorial thing, and that's why I thought it'd be good to have you both on at the same time tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on again, Pat. I guess just a quick little rundown. My artistic background is just from when I was a kid. Just kind of started as just more or less just doodling, and kind of turned into when I was in high school. I started doing some paintings, acrylic paintings, once the movie Titanic came out, and I was always fascinated with the Titanic. And once I started going to college, kind of got away from painting and started to concentrate more on graphite black pencil drawing. And once I moved to a town called Marinette, Wisconsin, which is about an hour north of Green Bay. By the way, the Packer game is on right now, so taking a little bit of a break from that. So I moved to Marinette, which is right on Green Bay, and I always had an interest in freighters also. So I started my drawings kind of off of that. I started doing Edmund Fitzgerald and some of the other freighters around the lake. So that's kind of how it got started. And I do various art shows during the summertime, right all around the Great Lakes region. And then the artwork that I do, I continue to do the Titanic as well and other ocean liners, and that's kind of more of a worldwide thing. So that's a little bit about my background.
But you've really your drawings of Edmund Fitzgerald are unbelievable, and maybe you could share with Tim and our audience. You were a part of the Edmund Fitzgerald Memorial last year. Is that correct?
Right. This was the 40th anniversary this past November, and I was actually asked through Facebook, which is where I post a lot of my work as I'm drawing new work. Of a lady that her father was Blaine Wilhelm, the lead oiler on the ship, and she had asked me if she had seen that I was going to the ceremony. At the time, I was just attending, and she had really taken an interest in the art that I had been doing, and asked me if I would be able to ring the bell for her father and for their family. And that was just an amazing honor to, first of all, just to be asked to do something like that. It was quite a moving experience. I have a hard time, I guess, describing the entire feeling of what that was like, but it was sure neat to have that chance. Whether I ever do it again or not, That was
Yeah.
just an amazing experience.
Well, yeah, and of course, Tim, he has had the opportunity to interview so many of the crew's families, and to be a part of the whole experience. You guys are both again a tragedy without a doubt, but to be a part of the whole thing, Tim, with his website and his interviews and all his research, and Tony, I know we've talked about Edmund Fitzgerald when you've been on the show many times. Just is still a lot of mystery to it, a lot of things that still go unanswered till this day.
Oh, right. Well, I think the biggest part of it is, there were no witnesses and there were no survivors.
Right.
So, you're never going to know for sure. And I don't know how you feel about that, Tim, but, the many different theories that are out there, and that's all there'll ever be. Because I don't think there is ever going to be a definitive cause, or they're ever going to be able to figure out a definitive cause of what happened. I lean towards one theory. I don't know about you, but, there's so many different ways to look at it. So I think that's a lot of it, that there's just never going to be a definitive answer.
Do you guys think, by chance, that the ship broke up on the surface? Or do you believe, like some theories believe that, like Tim mentioned, the Three Sisters, these massive waves that basically engulf the Arthur M. Anderson, and then of course there's been documents about where the pilot of the Anderson was kind of under that. This is it. What hit us is now heading toward the Fitzgerald, and like Tim said, one of the theories is that the ship just got blanketed and with all the problems. Do you think it broke up on the surface? Do you think it just plunged this thing down into the water? I know that when the bow of the ship is still upright, and it appears to me that from the pictures I've seen, there's a lot of plating damage on the front of the ship, almost like it hit the bottom and bounced back. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, I was going to say, I completely agree with Tony when he says that, all there can ever be are theories, and all of these expeditions that have happened, or even at this convention in Minnesota when I spoke in November, there are still people who are giving talks and they say, okay, we have definitive answers now and we can say exactly what happened. And I agree with Tony that we don't know for sure. So there are some people who believe one theory more than the other, and maybe Tony will tell you about the theory he sides with. So whenever I do an interview, I usually end up upsetting the interviewer because I have this website. So people always say, what do you think happened, Tim? And I always say, I don't know what happened any more than anybody else does. So I never tell anybody one theory over the other. But yeah, I completely agree that we just don't know. But there are definitely some theories I think might be more plausible than others.
Well, the bottom and up part. Now, one thing I know that the stern or the bow of the ship, the front of the ship is upright, kind of like similar to Titanic. It's upright.
Right.
The stern is upside down, a few hundred feet away. But then there's, as Bob Ballard says, there's that debris field in the middle where the ship is just mangled.
Right.
And obviously a lot of pieces are wrecked and destroyed.
I tend to, I'll go ahead and I'll discuss what theory I kind of side with. I think I told you this before, Pat. I side with the bottoming out near Caribou Island, and the reason I do that is because of the reported damage by McSorley as they traveled on. He reported, and there was no damage reported until they passed the area, and he reported with the fence rail being down, that they had a few vents missing, and they had a list. Now, what that kind of tells me is that, first of all, with the fence rail going down, the only way you can get that fence rail down is if you actually lift it out. It's in holders. If you lift out the stanchions, that's the only way you can get it out there. Now, if it was broken, now again, we won't ever know. If the wires were broken, that would mean that the ship had hogged up in the middle. And at the same time, if the vents were missing, we don't know if they were exploded off, or if they had broken off. You don't know. But then the list, immediately following that. So you're taking water on through the damage from bottoming and probably from the vents being gone. So as the ship just continued on, you're taking on more and more water. You don't probably realize it because of how bad the storm was. And eventually, there could be a combination of the three sisters that worked together, that the ship, went up a wave, went down, and then instead of recovering and coming back up, just kept going, until it hit the bottom. Like you said, with the plate damage to the bow, it almost looks like it accordioned into the bottom as it hit. It just wanted to keep going, and it just compressed.
Right.
And
while it's in very deep water, when you think about it, the ship at 800 feet would still stand out of the water. If you were to tip the bow up in one piece, you'd still have 250 feet of stern out of the water.
Right.
So granted, that number seems very, very deep, but that's only 2/3 of the overall length of the ship.
Exactly. And I think that the reason the stern ended up upside down is, as the ship is, the bow is plowed into the bottom, the stern, the propeller is still turning, and it's still trying to move the ship forward. And I think it probably had enough bite in the water where it just twisted itself right off. And that middle section of the ship, that 200-some feet of the ship that's just basically disintegrated, I think is a result of that twist, where a lot of it just I don't want to say disintegrated, because it really didn't. It's just a mangled mess.
Right.
So, and the stern ended up upside down and right near the bow. So I think that's part of it. If it had broken on the surface, like the Daniel J. Morrell, I think that the stern may have ended up some distance away. But, we don't, again, we'll never know. I don't know what Tim feels about that, but.
Do you guys both believe that it probably was over very quickly?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that those guys didn't suffer. I'm sure that, anybody that was in the possibly in the cabin areas or whatever. And again, the ship is immense. The front of it is absolutely immense. But I would assume that this just happened so quick. It was a matter of probably seconds, and everything was done for.
Right. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I will publicly say. I think it was probably over really quickly. Radio transmission and the Edmund Fitzgerald on radar all happened right around the same time. So I think when it did happen, it happened very quick. It happened around 7:10 or so. And I think it did happen. I think the process leading up to it was very slow. Only the actual sinking or the loss of life occurred rather quickly.
Tim, his Bob Ballard, the guy that found Titanic, has he ever done an expedition on Edmund Fitzgerald?
No. But so we were speaking earlier about the Canadian government giving permits to dive to the Edmund Fitzgerald and how it's technically not illegal as long as it's given with a permit. One of the people who's actually dove to the Edmund Fitzgerald gave a talk at that convention that I was at in November, and he and I were speaking, and he said, if I wanted to dive to the Edmund Fitzgerald today, I would not be allowed to. Only for everyone to think that nobody can get to the Edmund Fitzgerald, his personal opinion was, he said, if Bob Ballard said today he wanted to do an expedition to the Edmund Fitzgerald, he would be able to. He would get a permit. But he has not. And to my knowledge, I don't think he has shared any interest in doing that, only I don't know if those discussions have happened.
Yeah. Yeah, because he seems to he's pretty good at especially him and well, of course James Cameron with Titanic, with the whole research team he put together to try to explain some things. Again, so interesting. The two ships, while so different, so similar, there's still that little bit of mystery there that nobody can really solve. Like I said earlier in the show, Titanic, we know, hit an iceberg, but the ultimate demise, that was the start of things. But the ship did sink quite fast, and of course buried in all the mud, and of course down at 13,000 feet versus 500 feet. It is such a task to get down there to look at anything. But but still just that little bit of mystery that nobody has the answers for and probably never will.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I honestly think that that's why 40 years later, between everyone on board losing their life and the fact that we don't know for sure, this is why 40 years later people are still interested in this. Because as far as shipwrecks on the Great Lakes go, like I said, there have been thousands, and the Edmund Fitzgerald is the one that so many people to this day know about, and they know so much about.
Exactly.
And I'll add something to that too. What you're saying, Tim, about everybody knows about it. But first of all, I think that a lot of it has to do with the song. And at the ceremony this year, Frederick Stonehouse actually, he said the same thing, that the El Faro that just sank in the Atlantic Ocean. He says, now how many of you a year from now will know what that ship was even named? But because the Fitzgerald had that song written about it, that it is still known today.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually own a bowling alley, and that song actually gets played in our jukebox once in a while. It's amazing that people know what that is.
Yeah.
And then to add to that too, when I'm at art shows, I'll have kids that are 6, 7, 8 years old come and point to the drawing of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and Mom, Dad, Edmund Fitzgerald. They know that ship. It's just unbelievable. It's like the Titanic is the same thing. These kids come in and they point to it, and they know what it is. But they know the Fitzgerald. It's just amazing to me.
Let me ask you guys, and Tim, for you, has anybody, all these different wrecks, of course, Titanic, there's been a couple of movies, and of course the Cameron movie, it's hard to beat that one. Has anybody, as far as a story, I know there's a few books out there, but would you guys know, has anybody done a movie? Has there ever been talk about doing a movie on this ship and the crew, and especially knowing, as you got to personally meet, and Tony, you've met people, as you get to meet the families, has there ever been talk about somebody doing a feature-length film about the ship?
Yeah, there's actually been a lot of talk over the years, and I've been in touch with a few screenwriters and a few directors. In the past, none of those have materialized, although right now there's someone by the name of Justin Dombrowski. There is a script. There is a script for a movie, and there's a lot of movement that's going on. So there's a lot of tricky things that go into trying to make a movie, but there is someone who has written a script. His name is Justin, and that is something that I would be on the lookout for. There is a lot of interest in making a movie about the Edmund Fitzgerald and the men that were lost on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and he's somebody that I'm in touch with, and that's something that's really important to him, is focusing on the men, because a lot of people will focus on the shipwreck, they will focus on the ship, but he really wants to tell a story about these men that were lost. That's cute. Be on the lookout for him.
Well, I would love, again, there's been plenty of documentaries out there, none of late, unfortunately. Now, I know there is a couple of books that have been put out, and Tony, you've mentioned a few different authors, some people that you've met, at your shows, and people connected with it. But it's pretty limited. But again, with Tim's website, which is like the ultimate guide to this happening, there's just not a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, it's funny. You think about the Titanic. Go back to that and all the books that have been written about that ship, and not just the Titanic, but her sister ships, and there's only been maybe 5, 6 books about the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's just amazing the difference in the amount of authors that have written about the subject and that really know about it. It's one thing to just write a book, but it's another thing to really understand and know about it.
Yeah.
And be able to tell a story. I think that's important. That people are going to tell it right. Don't try to don't romanticize it, because there's nothing romantic about it. It's a tragedy, it's a disaster, and I think that if someone's going to tell a story, it needs to be very factual and make sure that people understand that.
Exactly. Have you, Tim or Tony? Are there still? I would assume there's still surviving crew members of the the Arthur M. Anderson. Have either of you had an opportunity to talk to anybody that was on the Arthur M. Anderson the night this happened?
I have not.
Neither have I. No.
Are there still surviving? I would assume there's still probably some surviving members, but maybe not. I mean, Cooper was in his 50s or 60s at the time, correct? So that would make him over 100 now. Those people the crew would be quite old.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there are any surviving crew members. I don't want to say yes or no since I don't know the full crew and what their ages were.
Right, and I'm not sure either. That's kind of a gray area there.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good question. Because, I don't know if anybody's really ever asked that. It's always been Bernie Cooper. Everybody always wanted to talk to Bernie Cooper.
Right.
But nobody really focused on the other crew, what they thought, what they felt. That's actually an interesting question.
Had to be pretty horrific for them. Again, I'm sure just like the ship that turned away from Titanic or sailed away. Of course, the Anderson was trying to get there to help them, but if it was, it was in those storm conditions, like you said, all they could do is make 1.5 miles an hour. That's not far. I mean, that's a few. When you think about it, the scheme of things, that's a handful of ship lengths in an hour's time. That's
right.
It was so horrific that night. Tony, your art, I see it on Facebook. It's amazing, man. Why don't you throw out your website for our listeners? As I always push your stuff. If somebody wants an unbelievable picture, you've got a God-given talent in what you do, and I see that you've been commissioned to do a lot of stuff. Your drawings of ships and lighthouses and stuff is just amazing.
Well, I appreciate that very much. The website that I have is greatlatesartwork.webs.com, and that's WEBS.com. I almost gave you my email address, but so it's greatlatesartwork.webs.com, and all of my drawings that I've done of not just Great Lakes freighters, but ocean liners, lighthouses, few naval ships, those are all on there, and anything can be ordered off of there also. And then as far as Facebook goes too, it's facebook.com/Tony Strublic Maritime Artwork, and that's STRUBLIC. So if anybody out there is ever interested in checking out some of my art, and the Facebook page, I also post updates as I'm working on something, so you can see them being done. So those are the two ways that you can get a hold of me if you're ever interested in anything.
Well, and again, I encourage people to look at your work because it's absolutely amazing. What's we've got a few minutes left, guys, and Tim, the 2 hours went so quick. What's on the horizon for both of you and Edmund Fitzgerald? Are you both going to go back to the memorial services or anything planned for 2016 as far as anything to do with Edmund Fitzgerald?
Yeah, so actually, since this started when I was in the 8th grade and then I was in high school and undergrad and graduate school, a lot of times it was very difficult for me to try to get to one of the memorial services. So this year, now that I'm finally not in school, like I said, I was able to go to a memorial service, and I've become very, very close friends over the years with Pam Johnson, Robert Rafferty's daughter, and we were discussing how great it was to get to catch up, that we are likely going to go to a memorial service together next year. So I would like to be able to start being able to commemorate that more often. And now that I'm not in school, hopefully going to be able to make even more updates to the website over the years.
Yeah, because it's again, it is so impressive. There's so much detail. Now with these memorial services, there's a couple of them, isn't there? I mean, I know there's I read about one was it one of the anchors that they recovered from the Fitzgerald, not from the sinking site, but from somewhere else, and it's on display somewhere. And on the date, they light 29 lanterns around it or something like that. Is that true?
I'm not sure if you're referring to River. There are so many memorial services, and I actually point to a few of them on my website. You're able to find out about where you can go to them each year, and I update that. But yeah, I know there's generally a memorial service in River Rouge, which was where the keel of the Edmund Fitzgerald was laid. There's the one at Whitefish Point, which is the most well-known one, and that's where they have the bell ringing ceremony of the actual Edmund Fitzgerald bell. For the longest time, there was a ceremony at Mariners Church in Detroit, which has now become a maritime disaster memorial. So on November 10th, or on the Sunday closest to November 10th, they remember all of the shipwrecks. But that's the memorial service that was originally talked about in the song. Depending on where you are in the region of the Great Lakes, you can find many different memorial services to attend.
Gotcha.
I know the one.
Go ahead, Tony.
The one you're referring to with the anchor, that's at the Dawson Great Lakes Maritime Museum, Belle Isle by Detroit.
Gotcha.
I was able to visit that when I was younger, my middle school days, actually, and that was right after they had brought the anchor up out of the Detroit River.
Gotcha.
So that was quite an experience too. When you're a young lad, you're learning. You see this giant anchor sitting there that came from the Edmund Fitzgerald. That was pretty neat too. I know that ceremony is getting a little more well known also.
With the one you attended, Tony, with the bell ringing, is that kind of the big one where all the families join on a yearly basis on that date?
That's the big one.
That's definitely the big one.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a Chicago native. I moved here to Utah 20-some years ago, but I would like to get back. I do get back at least once a year, or try to get back once a year, but I would love to. Our family used to have a home in Saugatuck, Michigan, on the southern end of Lake Michigan, and was able to go back after 40 years to where we used to have a summer home. But I would love to get up to one of those events again, because again, they're touching without a doubt, and so meaningful. With another thing is Shelley Russell. Now she wrote it. Was that turned into a stage play, Tim? The Holding Our Own, or is that just a book?
Yeah, it was a play. That, and there's also 10 November, so there are a couple different plays.
A lot of stuff.
I think Holding Our Own was it was more well known than the other play, though. Gotcha.
Guys, the couple hours went really quick. Tony, one more time, why don't you go ahead and give your website out, so that if people want to go and if they want to get some maritime artwork, it's so affordable and beautifully done. Why don't you give our listeners your information one more time?
Sure. It's Great Lakes Artwork, and it's all one word, .webs, WEBS.com. And then, like I said, I have a Facebook fan page also, Facebook.com/Tony Strublic Maritime Artwork. That's a lot of new work that I post and updates to pieces that I'm currently working on. So those are two ways to get a hold of me. If you're ever, if anybody's ever interested in commissioning something, I can definitely get in contact with you as far as what I have for rates and different sizes that I offer. So
gotcha.
If anybody's interested, please get a hold of me.
And Tim, your website, ssedmundfitzgerald.org. And again, it's just amazing. It's always updated, and I just commend you to the amount of time and effort that you've put into the website. I've learned so much, and anybody that has interest in this great ship needs to go out there. It's just like a book. It reads so comfortably, and all these interviews and the people that you've met, and it's been an honor to meet both of you. Tony, we've had you on a couple times, get you back on again, and Tim, down the road, if you have time, I'd love to have you back on again. The 2 hours went too quick. It's just amazing what you have here.
Oh, absolutely, anytime.
Okay, guys, well, have a great weekend. Be safe, have a great year, and I'll stay in touch with you both.
All right, thank you. Go Pack, go.
All right, sounds good. Take care, guys. Good night.